Welcome to the Troubadour podcast. My name is Kirk Barbera, and today we are going to cover the poem Spring by William Shakespeare. Now, this is a poem in Love's Labour Lost, a play by William Shakespeare, but we're going to treat it as its own independent entity, regardless or separated from the play. I have a really integrated thought about why this is such an important poem. Although the poem itself is great and wonderful and playful as a poem, although it's maybe not the most profound poem you'll ever experience, what it does really well in what Shakespeare does and why so many people who like poetry and have studied poetry keep going back to Shakespeare is that he does so well and so consistently what it is that poetry does. That poetry is unique from every other form of communication. It's unique from music. It's unique from paintings. It's its own unique world. And one of the things you have to understand about poetry is that there are several different forms of what or things that language does, like aspects of language or I guess forms of language. One of them would be something like information. We use words, speech, writing to convey information. We also use it to persuade. Now, information, by the way, is the dominant way that we use words and language and speech and writing. But the third way, there's persuasion, there's information. The third form of language would be experience. We can use words to convey experience. Notice this is different than what music really does. Music can convey an experience, but that is often with the words that they use. If you just listen to a symphony, it will often just the experience you feel is a purely emotional one. If you listen to a speech by a political person or by a professor, you're going to get information conveyed in a certain way, and you're going to get a purely informational, intellectual form of language. And that's what you're going to be receiving. It's really going to hit, a good speech might hit a little bit of intellectual and a lot of emotions. It might hit a lot of intellectual if it's the professor and maybe a little bit of emotions, but that's about it. With a poem, it's going to reach the whole W-H-O-L-E person. It's going to reach the intelligence, the senses, the emotions, and the imagination. So there's a dimensionness to it. There's a wholeness. There's a depth. There's multi-dimensions to what a good poem is reaching. It's going to reach all of you. It's going to make your heart beat a little faster. It's going to make you see things, visuals, lots of imagery. And one of the ways that poets do this is by utilizing all the resources or multiple resources of language, such as connotation, imagery, metaphor, symbol, paradox, irony, allusion, sound repetition, rhythm, pattern, and so on and so forth. And this is part of what I explore in many of my previous videos. Now, so that is a kind of a preface to what I think is important about poetry and, why it's so unique, and it's a loss that we're not taught poetry properly because it's a very big challenge to teach poetry properly. By the way, I'm not saying that it's anybody's fault or anything. It is a difficult thing. So what we're going to do today is we're going to explore a poem. Now, before the poem is Spring, and I'm actually going to show you a whole bunch of images, and this is something I usually do not do, but I really want you to get the imagery and how the words are used or going to be used to convey, to hit us sensually, to hit us emotionally, to hit us intellectually, and see what else we can come up with in thinking about it, and also the understanding of it. So there's a lot of imagery in this poem. You're going to hear about, and it's a short poem, 2 stanzas. So it's not a long poem. You're going to hear about turtle doves. They're actually called they're abbreviated as Turtles. You're going to hear when turtles tread. So think of turtle doves mating, tread, mating. And we're going to go over this again, so don't worry. But I want you to see this for this. I don't usually do this, but this time I want you to see this first. Daisies pied and violets hued. Daisies pied and violets hued. This isn't really daisies pied as much, this image, if you're looking on YouTube. By the way, if you are listening on the Spotify or iTunes, wherever you listen to podcasts, that's fine. You can always Google these words as I'm going through them. So I'm just kind of going through some of the words that you're going to hear, and that will, I hope, help kind of get the images in your head a little bit. And then we can go back through it again once we read it all the way through at least once. We're going to hear about rooks, which is a type of crow, a black crow. We're going to hear about cuckoo buds, which is a flower, a yellow flower. We're going to hear about lady smocks, again, another type of silver white flower. We're going to hear about jackdaw, a bird that loves humans. And then we're going to hear about the cuckoo. So I just, like I said, wanted you to get a quick, I'll probably try and pop those up again, or we'll definitely mention them again, because this is a poem made up primarily of those images, those words that I just discussed or explained. Okay, so if you are watching, then I have just popped up on screen the song Spring by William Shakespeare. Now let me read it, and then we'll go through it line by line. When daisies pied and violets blue, and lady smocks all silver white, and cuckoo buds of yellow hue do paint the meadows with delight. The cuckoo then, on every tree, mocks married men, for thus sings he, cuckoo, 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 a word of fear, unpleasing to a married ear. When shepherds pipe on oaten straws, and merry larks are ploughmen's clocks, when turtles treads, and rooks and daws, and maidens bleach their summer smocks. The cuckoo then, on every tree, mocks married men, for thus sings he, cuckoo, 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 a word of fear, unpleasing to a married ear. And that's it. Now, it probably didn't make any sense to you if you were like me, and that's fine. That's absolutely acceptable. There's nothing wrong with it not making any sense to you. In fact, that is normal. Hopefully, the way, I know I made one or two mistakes in the reading of it, but hopefully there was a kind of feeling of the words a little bit. Now, what happens as you read poetry over and over again, the same poem, I should say, over and over again out loud. Well, lost the poem on the screen for a second for some reason. But when you read a poem over and over again out loud to yourself, the totality of it really starts making more and more sense, and it starts becoming a part of you, the total of it. Remember, because it's not just hitting you intellectually, it's also hitting you in your senses, emotions, imagination. And so this is going to use a lot of those. You're going to have to use your imagination. And by imagination, I mean image machine, right? The image creator in your mind, imagination, right? That's what imagination means. And so you have to imagine these things. You have to look at them in your mind. And even though I'm reading this at the end of summer and fall is going to be here, so we've already passed spring, this is in the deepest of winters, you can remind yourself of spring with all of these lovely images. When daisies pied, picture daisies, multicolored daisies, and violets blue, and lady smocks, it's another flower, all silver white, and cuckoo buds of yellow hue, so cuckoo buds. So we're getting daisies, violets, lady smocks, cuckoo buds. We have 1, 2, 3, 4 different types of springtime flowers. When these daisies pied and violets blue and lady smocks all silver white and cuckoo buds of yellow hue, when they do paint the meadows with delight. So now we have these images, and then we have a time reference that when this occurs, which is in spring, when they do this action, they paint the meadows. It's like God, is a painter and he's painting the meadows, but it brings an emotion with delight when it paints with delight. So you're looking at this image and it's painting it with delight. When that happens, then the cuckoo then on every tree mocks married men. For thus sings he, cuckoo, 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 a word of fear, unpleasing to a married ear. And I kind of added a little oomph to that, I hope, just to kind of give you a sense of what that might mean. Now, the cuckoo part, I'm going to hold off for 1 second. If you know the root and the meaning of that word or where it's coming from, then good for you. But there's a reason why Shakespeare's using the word cuckoo, which is the sound that a cuckoo bird would kind of make. That's where we get the name cuckoo for the bird. It makes that sound, and it also sounds like a particular type of word, or I think the word actually might come from this, but we'll talk about that word. That's really important here because that's going to hit the intellectual once you start realizing what that word is. And the emotional and the imaginative. I think it'll hit that once you realize that, it will have that sense. If I can go back to what I was saying in the preface, one of the feelings, or to me, the experience of the experience of experiencing a poem, is the best way I can put it in the moment, is akin to when I hear religious folk talk about epiphanies from God. And you could lower it to just epiphany. When you have an epiphany, if you're like walking out in the middle of nature, for instance, in this case, and you have some epiphany about life, where that epiphany come from? Is like things all of a sudden connected. It's like, oh, that's why she acted that way, right? Or that's why that person I was friends with is no longer friends with me. You just have an epiphany, or this is what's going on at work that doesn't make any sense, or why I'm not getting these promotions, or why this is occurring, or why I lost a client, right? There's a whole, you're kind of just walking around, or you're doing dishes, you're doing something else, and you have that epiphany. And, to me, when I experience, especially certain kinds of epiphanies where they affect my total life, when they have to do with like relationships or purpose or things of that nature, or new ideological understandings, and you're out looking at nature, there is a kind of total sense. And you can see paintings by great artists who draw or paint that moment of epiphany, and it's a whole body experience. It's not just, that's not like a serious epiphany. That's like a new understanding. An epiphany is like a whole, like, oh my gosh, right? It's like you want to run out of in the streets naked, yelling eureka type epiphany. Like, it's a big moment. It's a big realization, but it connects with all senses of you, with the like I said, your senses, your emotions, your intelligence, your intellect, as well as your imagination. Maybe your memory, which can be similar to imagination sometimes. So I just wanted to kind of mention that when we talk about cuckold in a minute. Oh, I gave you the word. So the word is cuckold. If you know what that means, then great. If not, when the realization comes, it'll hopefully be a little bit more like an epiphany. And these images and what's going on in this poem will have a different kick to it, do you? Okay. So when shepherds pipe on oaten straws, so imagine a shepherd, right? Somebody who has sheep and tends to sheep, moving them around. A shepherd has pipe, and he's playing his pipe, maybe for a maiden. We're going to see maidens here in a second, on oaten straws. So they're sitting on straws. So, we're getting this idyllic farm life imagery here. And merry larks, so merry, happy larks. We're getting some more emotional language here, right? So lark is a bird that I showed you earlier, or you heard earlier. And merry larks are plowmen's clocks. So a man who plows, and when he uses the lark, the happy songbird, to be his clock because they wake up early. So this is connecting people with nature now. Now nature and people are similar, just like time is part of nature and part of our syncing with time, for instance. Now the plowman, or men, individuals, humanity, is syncing with nature. That's kind of what we're getting here that we didn't get in the first stanza. In the first stanza, we just got images, and then, they that are painted with delight as such. So when shepherds pipe on oaten straws and merry larks are plowmen's clocks, when turtles tread, so turtle doves mate, and rooks and daws, and maidens bleach their summer smocks. Now, I think when it says and rooks and daws, I think it's a continuation of the tread, the mating. When turtles tread and rooks and daws. So now we have these animals, the animal kingdom, mating. This is the mating season, spring. And we just saw that humans are similar, right? And then we see maidens. Now, what's a maiden? Now, a maiden is a unmarried female. So we're talking about mating with, just like the turtles, the rooks, and the daws. And maidens bleach their summer smocks. Now, I don't know the practice during this is, again, in the 1500s with Shakespeare. Maybe there's some bleach to clean their summer smocks, to get ready for their summer smocks. So they bleach them and they wear them in spring and summer, I imagine, when things get a little hotter. And they, haven't been wearing them, so they bleach them. I don't know what the process is, but that's essentially what I'm getting from it. So when that happens, when these things happen, the cuckoo then on every tree mocks married men. For thus sings he, cuckoo, 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 a word of fear, unpleasing to a married ear. So let's put it all together now. What are we seeing? So we see this image of delight. Now, we can ask, like, who is it that is seeing this? And I think it, you could see it as, like, who's the narrator of this? I think you could see the narrator as like all of nature. That's one way that I look at it. And it's just kind of like a statement of fact, like gravity, like E equals MC squared. It's just, this is the law of nature. When daisies pied and violets hued, and, mating season happens because it's part of the natural world. That's kind of what I'm hearing. So when daisies pied and violets hued, and we have this paint the meadows with delight, when that happens, the cuckoo then on every tree mocks married men, for thus sings he, cuckoo, 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 a word of fear, unpleasing to a married ear. Now, cuckoo is unpleasing to a married ear because it reminds you of the word cuckold. Now, cuckold is when a married man is, unbeknownst to him, having another male have sex with, just to be clear, have sex with his wife unbeknownst to the married man. That's the word cuckold. So when that happens, and this I think happens because, or the word came about because birds would do this sometimes, is a male bird might leave the nest, and then another male bird will come in and, have sex or mate with the female bird. And that's where the kind of idea comes from. So what does this first stanza kind of bring to mind? So we have this beautiful imagery and all this wonder and delight. It's the meadows are painted with delight. And yet there's a little teasing bird that for the married men who are standing in this scene and they're enjoying this, there's like a little, they're putting their eyes to the side, or maybe being reminded, oh man, I better go check on my wife, right? It's kind of like this is the time of cuckolding. This is the time of cheating in a sense, or extramarital activities without the husband's consent. So that's what the author, the poet in this sense, I think is saying. And he's putting it in the context of it's as rhythmic and natural as violets blew, daisies pied, lady smocks, and all these other natural things. So the cuckolding of a male human by his wife with another man, his wife having sex with another man, in other words, is as natural as the sun rising, or spring coming. So in other words, it's inevitable, right? It's part of nature that this happens. So when you think about it, does this poet, or at least this poem, reflect a positive view of marital, uprightness and marital vows? Does it hold that a view of women as, and of men who do that action behind the married man's back? Does it hold a very positive view or a negative view, or is it just making fun of it? What do you think? Now, just to kind of wrap up, in the second stanza, when shepherds pipe on oaten straws and merry larks are plowmen's clocks. Again, there's that reality kind of coming together when nature with metaphysical reality, in a sense, where these larks are the clocks, which, you think about time as just a metaphysical reality. It's a part of the universe. It's the totality of the the measurement of the movement of, giant objects or something like that. When turtles tread and rooks and daws and maidens, now we have, again, the humans bleach their summer smocks. The cuckoo then on every tree mocks married men. For thus, and why does it mock him? For this reason, sings he, cuckoo, 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 a word of fear, unpleasing to a married ear. So I think it's a simple poem, but it does a lot in terms, and also not only is simple, but the last 5 lines are the same. So really, for each stanza. So really, you have 4 unique lines in the first stanza, and then you have that refrain, the cuckoo then on every tree mocks. And then you have 4 in the second stanza, and then again, a repetition of it. So it's a very simple poem, but there's so much involved in it, right? You have just these natural things, and then in terms of flowers in the first stanza, and then you start having the human world incorporated into that, all with this refrain, with this repetition of the cuckoo reminding married men that this is the time, although it's beautiful and you see a maiden bleaching her summer smock, this is the time when married men get cheated on, right? And it's as inevitable as the sun rising, which kind of, in a way, taints the feeling of spring, but it's a part of the reality of spring in the mind of the poet. So that's our poem for today, Spring by William Shakespeare. I hope you enjoyed that. Please subscribe and enjoy future episodes.